Hello students, welcome to readmedprep Academy channel. Today in evolution part 4, we are going to talk about the mechanism of evolution. Microevolution. Evolution on a small scale refers to the changes in allele frequencies within a population. Allele frequencies in a population may change due to four fundamental forces of evolution such as natural selection, genetic drift, mutation and gene flow. Natural selection, it occurs when one allele or a combination of alleles of differences makes an organism more or less fit to survive and reproduce in a given environment. If an allele reduces fitness, its frequencies tend to drop from one generation to the next. What is the definition of natural selection? It's a process in nature by which only the organisms best adapted to their environment tend to survive and transmit their genetic characteristics in increasing numbers to the succeeding generations, while those less adapted tend to be eliminated. The evolutionary path of a given gene, that is how its allele change in frequency in the population across generation, may result from several evolutionary mechanisms acting at once. Here in this image you can see the ancestor finch. Because of the natural selection, depending upon the food availability, the finches have changed, like the insect eating, the woodpecker type insect eating and seed eating finches. For example, one gene's allele frequencies might be modified by both gene flow and genetic drift. For another gene, mutation may produce a new allele that is favored by natural selection. Here in this image you can see the natural selection. On the left side image you can see homozygous dominant capital A, heterozygous dominant capital A, small a, which are all dark colored bugs, and homozygous recessive, which is represented as small a, small a. In the environment which is dark, that means the light grey beetles are spotted and eaten up by the birds more often than the dark ones. If X is eaten by birds, then only the survivors will produce. In the next generation, there will be more population of dark colored beetles having the homozygous dominant capital A and the heterozygous dominant capital A, small a. And the number of the population of the light grey beetles has been decreased because they usually disappear. Types of natural selection. There are mainly three types of natural selection. One is stabilizing selection called the centripetal selection, directional selection and disruptive selection called the centrifugal selection. Other types are also present like the group selection and the sexual selection. Now let us talk about the stabilizing selection, otherwise called centripetal selection. This type of selection operates in a stable environment. The organisms with average phenotypes survive, whereas the extreme individuals from both ends are eliminated. There is no speciation, but the phenotypic stability is maintained within the population over generation. For example, measurements of sparrows that survived the storm clustered around the mean, and the sparrows that failed to survive the storm clustered around the extremities of the variation, showing stabilizing selection. Here in this image you can see the stabilizing selection, the mortality of sparrows in the storms. The body size, which is small and large, couldn't survive much, whereas the medium body size sparrows survived better. The survival of the common swift eggs of lac, the clutch size being 2 and 4, usually did not survive much. They were about 1.92 and 1.80 respectively, whereas the swift clutch size was 3. It survived better with 2.60. Now, directional selection. The environment which undergoes gradual change is subjected to directional selection. This type of selection removes the individuals from one end towards the other end of phenotypic distribution. For example, size differences between male and female sparrows. Both male and female sparrows look alike externally, but differ in their body weight. Females show directional selection in relation to the body weight. Here you can see in the image when a population genetics shift in one direction toward an extreme phenotype. Example, male house sparrows, black bibs, are preferred by females. Over time, we would expect the bibs to become bigger and bigger. Below you can see the curve where the original population is present and the evolved population where the mean is more. Disruptive selection, otherwise called centrifugal selection. When homogeneous environment changes into heterogeneous environment, this type of selection is operational. The organisms of both the extreme phenotypes are selected, whereas individuals with average phenotype are eliminated. This results in splitting of the population into subpopulation or subspecies. This is the rare form of selection but leads to formation of two or more different species. It is also called adaptive radiation. Example, Darwin's finches, the big size in relation to the seed size inhabiting Galapagos Islands. Here you can see in this image the disruptive selection when individuals at the upper and the lower ends of the curve have higher fitness than individuals near the middle. Selection acts most strongly against individuals of an intermediate type. In disruptive selection, the pressure of natural selection can become strong enough to split a single curve into two. Example, Darwin's finches and availability of large and small seeds only. In the curve you can see the split up of the curves into two curves on either side where the population occurs after selection, then the original population. In this image you can see the operation of the natural selection on different traits. Normally the mean curve you can see above, which has the number of individuals with phenotype in the y-axis, and the phenotypes favored by natural selection is highest, where the medium-sized individuals are favored. Whereas in stabilizing selection, the peak gets higher and narrower, whereas in directional selection, the peak shifts in the one direction. Whereas in disruptive selection, there are two peaks rather than the mean population. Group selection and sexual selection are other types of selection. The two major group selections are altruism and kin selection. What is altruism? Altruism refers to an individual acting in a way that will decrease in its survival chances but improve the survival chances of another individual. The Darwinian perspective emphasizing survival of the fittest gave the impression that selfishness was the norm. Pioneering work involving the study of animals living in social groups in fact revealed that cooperation and altruism are just as natural as selfishness. If cooperation and altruism have evolved, then they must have some adaptive benefits. Researchers have analyzed the conditions under which adaptations for engaging in such behavior can be expected to evolve. Here in this you can see the multi-level selection theory where the selection between the groups within a population is done. Later the selection occurs between the individuals within a group and the selection between the genes within an individual occurs. Now what is kin selection? It is a natural selection favoring the spread of alleles that increase the indirect component of fitness is called kin selection. Kin selection theory predicts that animals are more likely to behave altruistically towards their relatives than towards unrelated members of the species. The natural selection that favors altruistic behavior by enhancing reproductive success of relatives than towards unrelated members of the species. So kin selection, natural selection technically shouldn't allow for evolution of altruistic animals. But kin selection theory proved that it could. Kin selection says that relatives also might contain the altruistic gene. Thus offspring still receive gene and altruism continues. Altruism is preferred on a group basis, not an individual one, unless it has to do with the kin. Now what are the differences between the reciprocal altruism and kin selection? When you take the definition, reciprocal altruism is altruism that occurs between unrelated individuals when there will be repayment of the altruistic act in the future. Kin selection is natural selection that favors the altruism between closely related organisms. Main action of reciprocal altruism, one individual making sacrifices for another unrelated individual. Whereas kin selection, one individual making sacrifices for the relatives or closely related organisms. Organisms are usually unrelated in reciprocal altruism, whereas in kin selection they are related. The past behavior in reciprocal altruism provides the basis for reciprocal altruism, whereas in kin selection, past behavior does not matter. Promise of future aid. In reciprocal altruism, yes, whereas in kin selection, no. Now, sexual selection. Is sexual selection different from natural selection? Darwin saw that a distinct, only sexual selection could produce traits that compromise survival. The basic principle selection favors whatever gets more genes into the next generation. In sexual selection, fitness is measured relative to members of the same sex. Two kinds of sexual selection occurs. Intrasexual selection, where the mating success is determined by within sex interactions, example male-male combat. Intersexual selection, mating success determined by between sex interactions, example female choice of males. Intersexual selection is also referred as epigamic selection. Gene flow, movements of genes through gametes or movement of individuals in is called immigration and out called emigration of a population is referred to as gene flow. Organisms and gametes that enter the population may have new alleles or may bring in existing alleles but in different proportions than those already in the population. Gene flow can be a strong agent of evolution. Here you can see in this image the gene flow where the capital A beetles survive more better than the grey colored beetles with homozygous recessive character AA because of migration and because of being eaten by the birds. Genetic drift or Sewell-Wright effect. Genetic drift is a mechanism of evolution in which allele frequencies of a population change over generation due to chance or sampling error. Genetic drift occurs in all population sizes, but its effects are strong in a small population. It may result in a loss of some alleles, including beneficial ones, and fixation of other alleles. Genetic drift can have major effects when the population is reduced in size by natural disaster due to bottleneck effect, or when a small group of the population splits from the main population to form a new colony due to the founder's effect. Here you can see the gene drift where the homozygous beetles capital A, heterozygous beetles capital A, small a, and homozygous recessive beetles which are light grey, small a, small a. The frequency of capital A is 0.3, whereas the frequency of small a is 0.7. Due to chance events, only these three beetles which were present in the previous generation give rise to offsprings in the next generation. So the frequency of capital A is 0 and the frequency of small a is 1. Now mutation. Although mutation is the original source of all genetic variation, mutation rate for most organisms is low. Hence, new mutations on an allele frequencies from one generation to the next is usually not large. Here in this image, you can see the mutation generates random genetic variability. Mutation in gametes are heritable, can have advantageous, deleterious, or neutral phenotypic effects. You can see in the image about the birds where the original population has new allele frequencies which is passed on to the new generation. In this image, you can see the fruit fly, the genetic mutations that occur. Sepala-eyed can become bar-eyed, or the winged fruit fly can become wingless fruit fly. Now, what are the differences between evolution and mutation? Evolution is a process by which different kinds of living organisms are believed to have developed from earlier forms during the history of the earth, whereas mutation, the changing of the structure of a gene, resulting in a variant form that may be transmitted to subsequent generations. Evolution is a process of descending modern organisms from earlier organisms over time, whereas mutation is a heritable change in the nucleotide sequence of the genome. Evolution occurs later, mutation occurs first. Responsible for the production of a new organism best fits to the environment in evolution, whereas the mutation is the first step of evolution. So today in evolution part 4, we discussed about the mechanism of evolution. Thank you. Kindly subscribe, like, share and comment our channel readmedprep Academy. Kindly register for UG and PG NEET like MCQs in our website www.readmedprepacademy.com. Kindly join readmedprep Academy. WhatsApp the number given below. Our Facebook ID is readmedprep academy. Our email is readmedprepacademy@gmail.com. Our Instagram is readmedprep academy. Kindly post your questions in the comment box. We will reply with appropriate answers. Thank you very much.